From Detroit, good morning, everybody. I'm David Hartman. It is Thursday, the 17th of July. I'm standing in the lobby of the Detroit Plaza Hotel. It's Republican National Headquarters here. Ronald Reagan, last night late, received the nomination of his party for the presidency, and then in a very exciting development, he picked around midnight George Bush to be his running mate.
A Reagan spokesman denies reports that last night's negotiations collapsed, at least in part, because Ford was demanding that Henry Kissinger be named Secretary of State. Barry Serafin's at Ronald Reagan's hotel this morning. And Barry, what do we know about why Mr. Ford did not accept the offer last night?
Steve, what we are told is that Mr. Ford's demands were simply too great. These talks went on. They actually began on Tuesday afternoon. That's when Governor Reagan broached this idea. Mr. Ford's response, we're told, was he didn't think it was a good idea. He didn't see how it could work, but he would consider it. That, according to Ed Meese, Governor Reagan's chief of staff, was his response throughout, right up until after 11 o'clock last night, when the deal was finally killed. Much of the negotiation over the past couple of days was carried out not between these two men, but between their staffs, with Ed Meese, William Casey, Governor Reagan's campaign director on one side, on the other side, Bob Barrett, a former White House military aide for Mr. Ford, and Henry Kissinger was very much involved in this process. We're told that Mr. Ford wanted a major role in budget and defense and foreign policy. Those are big areas. We're not told any specifics, but clearly, in the end, Governor Reagan felt he couldn't concede that much authority. Steve?
It just seems like it would have been an almost impossible situation when you had a man at the top of the ticket that you wondered whether or not he was clearly in charge, and you wondered just how much authority was being given away. Incidentally, anti-ERA leader Phyllis Schlafly says that Reagan made a big mistake by choosing Bush, Schlafly predicting that Bush will lose votes for the GOP ticket. And North Carolina's conservative Senator Jesse Helms may have himself nominated for vice president tonight just as a protest.
This is Governor Reagan and George Bush.
Good morning. I know you're all wondering why we asked you here. The only opening statement I have, can't hear. That's better, huh? No? People in the front row said it's fine. All right, I said I know you're all wondering why we asked you here. But I take great pride in presenting to you now the man that I have recommended to the convention be nominated as a candidate for vice president in the Republican Party, and his lovely wife, Ambassador and Mrs. George Bush.
Thank you, Governor Reagan, and
I know
who's in charge here? But my comments are simply that last night, I believe it was around 10:30, 11:30, it's irrelevant. Governor Reagan called me, told me of his decision. I accepted enthusiastically, and I look forward to assisting him in every way possible to become the next president of the United States. And I know I speak for Barbara when I say we are delighted. I will await the action of the convention, of course, but I am very pleased to have been selected be Governor Reagan's choice.
Now we'll take your questions, and when I say we, I mean all four.
In your talk to Mr. Ford, what sort of terms or conditions on his part or proposed roles for him proved unacceptable or unresolvable in your discussion?
There was nothing of that kind. There were long hours of discussion about this. There were a number of people, of course, that the unique situation of the possibility of a former president taking place on the ticket. The discussions went on mainly between friends of his and my own people for hours, but the final decision was his and his only on the basis that from the very first he had been most hesitant and said that he just had an instinct, a feeling that it was not the thing to do, that he could be, as he put it, actually of more help and more value in his present capacity as a former president, campaigning for the ticket. And he did pledge. When he finally made the decision, came to me. This one? Is it? I thought they were, well, all right. Oh, we'll try one instead of two. He made it plain to me that finally he just had to believe that, and that he then pledged enthusiastically that he would do anything, everything, campaign wholeheartedly for the ticket, but felt that's the way it had to be.
Governor!
Wait a minute, Lou. Get those microphones to you there.
Governor, did you ever make a formal offer to Mr. Ford, actually ask him to serve as your running mate?
Well, when this whole idea came up, and it was in the minds of a great many people, why, of course, I had to and did tell him that this would be pleasing to me, and that I thought that it would be a most unusual thing and a precedent-shattering thing, and of course I said that.
Isn't it clear then, Governor, that Mr. Bush was your second choice in all of this, and that President Ford would have been your first choice?
I think the situation is so unique. A former president, and this is the way I think many party leaders viewed it, that the possibility that he might do this on a ticket, or rejoin a ticket, having been President of the United States, was such that I think it's a little more unique and a different situation than having a first or a second choice.
The people and the world the idea that you can make up your mind usually in a crisis?
I don't think it should be taken that way at all. I think I've described accurately what was taking place, and there certainly was no confusion, and there was no on-again, off-again thing as far as we were concerned. And when the final decision came, having watched the proceedings here in the hall, in the convention hall, recognizing now that there were rumors, there were people that were believing one thing or another, that I felt then, I made the decision instantly that rather than waiting traditionally until the next day, till a time like this, that and letting this mount over the rest of the night, that I would go and what? I would sure like it very much. You can ask the ladies questions too. That's why
Ambassador Bush, whatever the facts of what happened last night, there is now the widespread perception that you are the number 2 choice for the number 2 spot. Does that represent a problem to you in this campaign?
Absolutely not. The fact that Governor Reagan had discussions with President Ford, as he said, is unique. There's a very unique standing that President Ford has. And what difference does it make? I mean, it's irrelevant. I'm here, and this is I believe that Governor Reagan wants me on his ticket, and that's all I'm concerned about, and I'm going to work hard for his election.
No.
Ambassador Bush, how are you going to be able to campaign on the Republican Party platform, which favors a constitutional amendment on abortion and opposes the Equal Rights Amendment, when in your own presidential campaign you favored ERA and opposed the constitutional amendment?
Well, my view is that the big issues, the major issues in the fall, are going to be the questions of unemployment and the economy, and they're going to be the questions of foreign affairs. I oppose abortion. I favor equal rights for women. And I'm not going to say that I haven't had differences of some point with Governor Reagan and everybody else, many other people. But what I will be doing is emphasizing the common ground. I will be enthusiastically supporting this Republican platform, and that's the way it's going to be. And I'm not going to get nickeled and dimed to death by a detail. I oppose abortion, for example. I favor equal rights. Governor Reagan and I are in total agreement on that. And transcending that, the issues are going to be as I indicated. And that's exactly the way I propose to do it, not permitting myself to get bogged down in trying to find or accentuate or permit you to make me accentuate differences that I've had with the governor during the campaign, because they've been minimal. We've talked about it. We've read the platform.
May I add one word to that also about equal rights and the amendment? You see, there is no disagreement, and anyone who reads that plank in the platform recognizes that there has never been a more specific statement in support of equal rights than is in the Republican platform this year. The only difference of opinion that took place in framing the platform was one of how best to achieve equal rights, whether by statute and law or whether by amendment. And so there is no basic disagreement on that.
Governor, what was your reaction last evening when you saw President Ford on television discussing the possibility of him being your running mate while the negotiations were going on?
Well, I was caught a little by surprise because I thought that, well, I had held my peace, and as many of you know who threw questions at me, I'd decided that till we knew the outcome that something shouldn't be done, but I suppose he had those interviews scheduled, and he answered frankly and forthrightly on those, and from then on I knew that it was a matter of open discussion. Recognize this gentleman over here.
Governor, both of you men having arrived here via Nashua, New Hampshire, can you tell me first of all who paid for those microphones? And secondly, are you going to allow Jesse Helms to be nominated tonight?
Well, there's no way that I have a control of that. I paid for the microphones simply because that decision by the Federal Election Commission, you realize that campaigning is now a government-regulated industry. And the government regulations prescribed that the paper no longer could sponsor it, and there would have been no debate if we hadn't put up the money. As to Jesse Helms, that is up to the convention. I'm not sitting back at the stage there pulling strings, and there's no way that I could. There are rules that govern the convention, and rules as to how people can be put in nomination, and the convention will make that decision.
I must apologize for the audio from the news conference, which was terrible.
On the morning after the much-heralded Reagan-Ford ticket, which came apart before it was really put together, I chatted over breakfast at the Airport Hilton Hotel with Governor and Mrs. Milligan.
I feel very good. I think it's turned out extremely well. I think George Bush is going to add an awful lot to that ticket.
What do you think about all this that happened last night with President Ford? Just what was happening? I know you know more about it than I do.
No, frankly, I wish I knew a lot more than I know. I've never seen a period of greater confusion than I witnessed last night, and that all of us did.
State GOP Chairman Mel Larson believes the GOP has a strong ticket.
Well, I'm delighted that it's a Reagan-Bush ticket. For the Michigan Republican Party, that's great, because it means that all factions of that party will be pulling together this fall.
Many of the Michigan delegates later traveled downtown to the Stroh House for a little victory celebration. Most of the Michigan delegates, of course, had wanted George Bush all along.
Oh, I'm extremely excited about the ticket. I think it's a well-balanced ticket, especially for Michigan.
What do you think of the ticket that finally resulted after so much uncertainty last night?
Oh, I'm just enthused about it immensely, because I was a George Bush supporter, and I was elected as a Bush delegate.
You think you have a winner now?
Yes, we do. The Republican Party has a definite winning ticket.
I was kind of dispirited for a while last night when they were talking about Mr. Ford, who I have no objections to, but I think that would be a step down for him, and I wouldn't like to see that. I'm convinced we're going to win. I'm just tickled pink, to borrow a phrase from a famous Democrat from Minnesota.
I think it's a strong ticket. It represents all Republicans.
The Michigan delegates obviously believe they have a winning ticket, but we'll have to wait till November to see if this is indeed the year of the elephant. Ben Marshall, Channel 7 Action News, reporting.
Except for a moment, it was Gunga Din up there with the microphone, Ben. Thank you.
This is Barbara Walters. Ronald Reagan wouldn't have had to make that speech if he and Gerald Ford could have come to an agreement. What broke down the dream ticket was indeed Henry Kissinger, and it wasn't his fault. Gerald Ford himself, without Kissinger's asking, had said he wanted within his administration people with whom he could work, people like Henry Kissinger and economist Alan Greenspan. The Reagan negotiators took this to mean that Ford wanted Kissinger as Secretary of State. And this is where the negotiations broke down, and they never again got back on the track. Had the negotiations not broken down, this is how the plan would have worked. Ronald Reagan would have been Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. Ford, Chief Operations Officer. All fundamental decisions would have been Reagan's. All implementation, Ford's. This would include all major areas of government. For example, in the budget, the president would determine the broad strategic outlines, such as tax cuts, and Ford would carry out the decisions. In foreign policy, all areas of national security would report to Reagan through Ford. Both men felt that the job of president was now too huge for any one man to run, and the agreement in principle had been made. But Henry Kissinger, as Secretary of State, was the stumbling block, and nothing was the same once his name came up.
The Reagan caucus team spread out early today trying to stamp out the flickering conservative resentment against George Bush. Reagan's own daughter arguing the case before the Ohio delegation.
There is room in the Republican Party for everybody, and we want everybody in the Republican Party.
But many conservative delegates weren't satisfied.
All I'm saying is, as a delegate who was elected by my people on a platform of conservative republicanism, I want a chance to vote for somebody that I believe in for vice president.
I would say that if Jesse Helms or someone of that stature is nominated, that there will be a considerable number of votes from Ohio for him.
And in fact, such disgruntled conservatives as Maryland Congressman Robert Bauman and ERA opponent Phyllis Schlafly met with Senator Helms in his motel room to discuss the situation, after which Helms sounded a warning.
We are still holding the option of having my name placed in nomination tonight. I've got to have some assurances about various things, and then we would determine our course.
But tonight as the convention opened, Helms seems to have gotten the assurances he wanted that Bush would back the platform 100%. Or at least he seems to have gotten himself a place on the program to give a speech, which he's doing at this very moment, espousing his own brand of conservatism. In any event, Helms' name will not be placed in nomination, and harmony will continue to reign supreme here in Detroit.
Will be all harmony here on the floor. It is not all harmony within the Republican Party. There is some disappointment, some hurt feelings. One of Governor Reagan's closest friends, Governor Paul Laxalt of Nevada, has decided not to come here this evening because he's disappointed not so much with the ticket, but with the way that things were handled yesterday. And he has, or aides of his rather, have reportedly told some of our reporters that the governor prefers not to be here today and respond to the probing of the media. But we'd like to see what the reaction now to this new ticket is on the floor. We're going to go to all of our floor correspondents. First, here's Sam Donalds.
Well, Ted, here in the Michigan delegation, there's no disappointment at all because this delegation was for George Bush to be the vice presidential nominee, and Michigan's Governor William Milliken is with us. Governor, what are the strengths that you think Mr. Bush will bring to the ticket in your state?
I think the major strength that Ambassador Bush will bring is the appeal that he has across the country to not only to Republicans, and that's very strong, but to independents and even Democrats. I think it will express on behalf of Governor Reagan and the Republican ticket that we mean as Republicans to go out and to reach into all parts of this country.
Yes, but what is that appeal? What is that appeal?
The appeal, among other things, is that his background in international relations will complement Governor Reagan's experience in the domestic field. That's a very powerful combination and a great appeal in my judgment.
Thank you very much, Governor Milliken of Michigan. And now to my colleague, Sander Van Oken.
Thank you, Sam. I'm in Mississippi, one of the most conservative states in the country, which should be against George Bush. Wrong. And I'm with Trunk Lott, the congressman from Mississippi, who's the chairman of this delegation and a familiar figure from the judiciary hearings on impeachment a few years ago. Congressman, why is this delegation so solidly behind George Bush?
Well, we have voted to cast all 22 of our ballots for George Bush tonight because we think he will be a strong addition to the ticket. He was selected by Governor Reagan. We want to win in November. We think it's important that we get the man in the White House out of there and we put Ronald Reagan in there. If his decision is that George Bush is the best man to run with him to do that, then that's the thing we want to support.
I don't think this was reported, but I believe that you and the state chairman of Virginia and some other states sent word to Governor Reagan that Bush was acceptable to you before this convention convened. Is that right?
We did have an opportunity to meet with Governor Reagan, and while we had other personal preferences, I'm very fond of Jack Kemp, we made it very clear to the governor that George Bush we thought would be acceptable in our states of Mississippi and Virginia, and we could support such a ticket very readily.
All right, now, one other question. On the Human Resource Subcommittee, of which you were the chairman, you took a vote against abortion, you took a vote against the ERA. He's for both. How are you going to be able to reconcile that?
Well, I think that these are relatively single-oriented issues, and we have a platform that covers a lot of other things that he can very heartedly support and will support. I hope that certainly he will avoid making them an issue. He has said he can support the platform. There's some things in the platform I don't agree with, but I voted for it, and I can support it. And he's got to do that. I think he will do that, and we shouldn't get caught up with those two single issues.
It happened. There are two views in this hall. The first is rather benign, and that is that Jerry Ford simply bumped his head again, this time on the vice presidency. The other view is that Jerry Ford never had any intention of accepting a spot on Reagan's ticket, that he led him all along to believe that he would, and had no intention of doing it. Why? To get even with Reagan for 1976 by blemishing his final choice for vice presidency as a second choice. That's the prevailing view at the Reagan headquarters anyway. As one Reagan staffer told me today, Ronnie got rolled.
Lynn, go ahead.
Yes, we're standing here with Senator Richard Schweiker of Pennsylvania. He, of course, was Mr. Reagan's running mate before he ever got the nomination back in '76. Senator Schweiker, you were in on a meeting with the governor 2 days ago, and I believe you've just been telling me that you think you helped convince him that Ford might be a viable possibility.
Well, there were 3 governors and 3 senators, and after an hour and a half discussion, we all sort of reached a common consensus that a ticket with Ford would be a dream ticket, and we ought to try it and try a new approach. And out of it sort of grew the effort to draft Ford, which was quite alive and well for about 23 and a half hours.
Do you believe that you are the person who helped him make the decision to go for Ford?
I don't know. I wouldn't put it in terms of just me. I think we had 3 very important governors and 3 senators there, and Bill Brock and Bill Timmons. I think that consensus clearly, as a group, probably encouraged them. I think he was pretty receptive to Ford before the meeting, but we all questioned if it was reality.
And after that meeting?
We all became convinced it was worth a college try and that it might be a reality.
What is it that convinced you, and what do you think convinced Governor Reagan?
I think what convinced me was one of his closest friends saying that we hadn't approached Ford right, and if we talk about duty and patriotism and beating Jimmy Carter and the mess the country's in, with a few of his close friends, he really might reconsider. And lo and behold, that's really just what happened, but we ran out of time.
Thank you, Senator Schweiker.
Thank you, Sam. I'm standing with Clifton White, who invented modern convention communications by passing a phone to Tom Dewey at the 1948 convention. You were in charge of communications last night, Mr. White. Have you been asked to give back your crystal set? What happened?
Well, what happened in what sense? I think our communications were pretty good. Our problem was all you people running around out here.
Were you encouraging that in any degree?
No.
But now look, there was a plan, was there not, for Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford to come here, and you had demonstrations lined up, did you not?
No, sir.
Well, how did somebody like Senator Laxalt, who's very close, and I believe him, said he didn't know? Had no decision been made?
As far as I know, there was no decision made. I kept hearing the rumors, and people kept checking in from the phones on the floor that there was a motorcade, somebody was going to come to the hall, and I would try to check this out, and the reports that I got was nobody was going anywhere at that point.
Well, was there in any sense any attempt by either side, the Reagan side or the Ford side, to fan these rumors? We didn't just pass them on like typhoid Marys of misinformation.
No, but what really happened last night was a very interesting experience in regard to both television and conventions, because all conventions do take on a life of their own. They are contained in this hall, and as rumors start, they feed upon them, and as always happens with rumors, after they go for a little while, they become facts rather than getting checked back. And last night was almost a classic example of that, with almost all of the major participants except me and the trailer were trying to tell people that it wasn't happening.
Thank you very much. Frank?
Well, that's very interesting, Mr. White. I dare say that the rumors would have been stopped and the gossip would not have swept through this hall had not Gerald Ford made a couple of television appearances last night, fairly early on, and left the door wide open. Seemed to be, as a matter of fact, pushing it. That's what started all the commotion here last night, and people were then running all over the place saying that it was actually going to happen. People who seemed to be in a position of authority. Although I must say, I remember Cliff White saying that he didn't know that anything like that was taking place. He hadn't heard about a motorcade or anything like that.
Well, Max, I'm here with Congressman Robert Dornan of Pacific Palisades, California. And Congressman, last night when I told you that Reagan had selected Bush, you said, "Oh no, that's not going to help me win my re-election." Why'd you say that?
No, what I meant was I was shocked because we'd gone through so many changes. I had been the hapless messenger who had come down from the Sky Suites and told the entire delegation that Ford was locked in. That was it, and I started daydreaming about that dream ticket.
Oh, no, Congressman. As a good conservative from California, I think you meant that George Bush might not help you. Do you really think that's the case?
Well, the spontaneity of the moment was excellent, Sam, but you notice I'm polishing up my Bush button today, and I had a good night's sleep on it, and I think that Bush, second maybe to Jack Kemp and President Ford, would be our third strongest candidate.
By the way, tell us the name of your opponent.
It's either Kirk Douglas' son or Bela Lugosi's son, one of the movie star's son out there on the West Coast somewhere.
No, it's Gregory Peck Jr. that's going to run against you.
Well, his name is Carey. Let's give the kid a plug.
Thank you very much, Congressman Dornan.
I'm convinced that the chief significance electorally of a vice president, A, is always hard to anticipate, but B, in this case, Bush probably is insurance against John Anderson, and therefore will probably push Anderson toward the left, where he probably would go anyway in pursuit of his money sources.
George, why do you think it is that there is this fascination, or at least a certain fascination among moderates within the party for George Bush, when, as Frank pointed out a moment ago, he's really rather a conservative fellow?
I think it's almost a journalistic imperative that we have to divide people into these camps, and therefore journalists all got out their moral micrometers somewhere in the campaign and began measuring these minute differences. But one of the funniest phrases in the entire history of American politics must be the phrase used in the context of 1980, the Republican left. But that's it, I guess.
All right. Hal Bruno, what do you think this is going to do in November? You think that George Bush is going to be an enormous help? Will he pull the moderates over? Will he pull the independents? Will he pull some of the disgruntled Democrats over?
I think he's going to be an asset in some states where Reagan would need help. You're not going to have a lot of Democrats saying, "Oh boy, George Bush, just what I wanted. I'll vote for him because he's vice president." That's not going to happen. I think what it does do, it sends off a signal, which is what Reagan wanted to do in this convention, that, look, I'm not an ultra-conservative. I didn't take somebody from the far right. It may be that we'll have a normal, slightly conservative Republican administration if I'm elected. And I think there are enough Democrats who are dissatisfied with Jimmy Carter that they might say to themselves, well, I'll vote for a Republican.
Hal, forgive me, I'm going to have to interrupt you for a moment, because the picture that we're seeing right now is not you, but the reflection in a limousine, and inside that limousine is Governor Reagan himself, who is at this moment about to enter Joe Louis Arena. It will be some minutes, of course, before he comes to the convention floor. I assume that he'll be taking into one of those holding rooms. There you see Governor Reagan and Nancy Reagan.
We're here.
Getting out of the limousine. We're here. I think that was Governor Reagan.
Mr. Reagan, what are you going to tell the people inside? What are you going to tell the people inside? Vote Republican.
What are you going to tell the people inside? I don't know if you could hear what Governor Reagan said, but vote Republican. That's right. One of the great redundancies, I suppose, of the evening. If there's any group in the country that will vote Republican, we're here with them. All right, you see the enormous crowd. They are now going to move as best they can into the hall behind Governor Reagan. As soon, of course, as Governor Reagan comes out here and addresses the convention, we will rejoin that. But for the moment, let's rejoin our colleagues, our analyst colleagues, and get back to a discussion of what it is that this ticket is going to do to the Democrats. At the moment, Hal Bruno, you were cautioning us a couple of days ago not to get too involved with the large lead that the Reagan-Bush ticket would have in the polls. Do you have any idea of what that lead is? Still around 10, 15 points?
It's somewhere around 15 points, somewhere 10, 15. I think it's going to go up quite a bit in the next week or two. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it 20, 25 points ahead by the time we get to the Democratic convention. But let me point out, it doesn't mean anything. The polls as they exist today have no relationship to what the situation is going to be in October and November, and that's when it really counts.
With Frank Sinatra and his wife, Barbara Sinatra, up here in the VIP section overlooking the entire convention. Mr. Sinatra, what brings you here this very evening?
Well, actually, we've been here a couple of days, Barbara and I have, and we came to watch what I'd hoped would happen, and it did happen, that Ronnie was nominated, and also to sell some automobiles for Chrysler.
How long have you been a Ronald Reagan for President fan?
Ever since he started running for the presidency, but I was a Ronnie Reagan fan when he was running for the gubernatorial jobs in California.
You're also a friend, I believe, of former President Ford, are you not?
Yes, we're all neighbors, as a matter of fact.
You got any insights into what went on yesterday?
I haven't the slightest idea, and I'm really as confused as anybody else.
Would you have liked to have seen a Reagan-Ford ticket?
I wouldn't have minded. I wouldn't have minded at all. I think it would have been well, they call it a dream ticket. The commentators kept calling it, and I think it's true. It would have been a dream ticket, although Mr. Bush is a very capable man.
As you mentioned, you have been doing those Chrysler commercials. Should we be expecting to see a Frank Sinatra Reagan for President commercial pretty soon?
I wouldn't doubt it. If they want me to do it, I'd be happy to, you know, sing some songs or do anything to help him get elected.
What do you think is important about a Reagan-Bush ticket?
Well, I think they're going to make a change in the way the nation has been running. I don't want to get into politics in regard to Carter and the rest of the people in Washington, but I think there should be a change.
Thank you very much, Frank Sinatra. Frank, back to you.
All right, thank you, Lynn, and thank you, all Blue Eyes. The reason for the commotion down there now is because they've just announced the final vote. Guess who won? Bush, 1,832, Helms 54, Jack Kemp 42, and there were 66 other votes cast for various candidates, including Howard Baker, Phil Crane, and a number of others. While all of this is going on, we should point out that a giant movie screen is being lowered behind the platform right now, and they're just keeping this demonstration going for a while. What is next on the program? And the program, uncharacteristically, is way, way ahead of schedule. What is coming up now on the program is going to be roughly a 10-minute profile film of Ronald Reagan. Don't dismiss it too lightly. It is not simply a propaganda film. Of course, the party prepared it, the party paid for it, and don't expect anything nasty about Ronald Reagan in this film. But in this film, as well as in Governor Reagan's speech, we're going to get a sense of the Reagan campaign and the man.
Well, my feeling is that the nominee, Reagan, came out of this with his stature not damaged and indeed in some ways enhanced. It seems to me what he did when he came to Detroit was said, look, let's try a moderate departure from principle or from tradition of the old principles, and let's pursue it moderately. As they tried to pursue this with former President Ford, they found that there was a difference between what Governor Reagan had in mind, which was a moderate enhancement of an office that is remarkably unformed in our country, and a somewhat radical improvisation that Governor Reagan thought might threaten the constitutional equilibrium. He drew a line clearly between those, and it was on that, I think, in the end, that finally the negotiations fell apart. There came a point of principle he would not cross, and a point in time that he could not let this proceed, because he couldn't let the country go to bed and Europe go through a day believing that, as people did believe by 11 o'clock last night, that the Ford-Reagan ticket was an accomplished fact. So I believe that it was a moderate undertaking, decisively begun and cleanly and decisively ended with very little damage.
On the other hand, George, you know, the country did spend these hours last night hearing all about Gerald R. Ford rather than about Governor Reagan. And I'm reminded, too, of the fact that not so very many months ago, Governor Reagan thought it might not be a bad idea to come to the convention and present the convention with, say, 3 names and say, go ahead and make your choice.
Well, if
that was rejected, however, on the grounds that it would display or reflect perhaps a certain indecisiveness.
Yes, but look what would have happened had he done that. Had he come here and said, take your choice from all the people, you would have got first a vote for Ford, and if Ford had turned it down, you would have got a vote for Bush. So in effect, you had, in the outcome, what was anticipated.
George, wouldn't he be better off not to try it at this late stage? I agree with you that in the long range, he's probably not damaged by it, but short range, it looked like a pretty inept performance last night. And what did it really accomplish?
Well, aptness or ineptness is in the eye of the beholder, and I didn't think it looked inept at all. I thought it was decisively handled and cleanly ended. I don't think there are certain kinds of negotiations you cannot conduct until you have a deadline imposed to concentrate everyone's mind. And you have the deadline produced by the schedule of the convention.
He grew up in small towns in Illinois, a Midwesterner at heart. His father, Jack, was a salesman who followed jobs that led the family from Tampico, Illinois, to Galesburg, and finally to Dixon. Here, the young boy grew into manhood. And it was here, in America's heartland, that he developed his deep sense of values. The Reagans were a thrifty, hard-working, close-knit family. Luxuries were few and hard to come by. But to young Ron, nicknamed Dutch by his dad, life in Illinois was a rich and happy time. Young Dutch always had to work for spending money and to help out his family. Of all the jobs he had, his favorite was lifeguarding at Lowell Park on the Rock River. After high school, Dutch Reagan landed a football scholarship from the school of his dreams, Eureka College in Eureka, Illinois, sister college of TCU, Texas Christian University. His great loves at Eureka were football, drama, swimming, and making friends on campus and with the people in town. He did what he had to do to make ends meet, everything from washing dishes in the sorority house to coaching the swimming team after classes. Upon graduation, to pay off his student loans, Ron took a job as a sports announcer with a fledgling radio station in Davenport, Iowa, station WOC. His picturesque style of broadcasting let the listeners see all the action. His reputation spread quickly, and he soon made the big time. Head sports announcer for WHO Radio in Des Moines, Iowa. Even today, there are a lot of people in the Midwest who remember Dutch Reagan as the voice of the mighty Chicago Cubs and the White Sox. One spring morning, announcer Reagan arrived in California to join the Cubs at their spring training camp. With a deep love for acting, the help of a friend, and a bit of good luck, he was soon offered a contract with Warner Brothers Studios. He became a star who appealed to audiences because he was so clearly one of them. Few knew it at the time, but he was also a peacetime volunteer Army officer. So with the outbreak of World War II, he put aside his career, signed on for active duty, and was transferred to a special Air Force training film unit. 4 years later, Air Force Captain Reagan returned to Warner Brothers to resume his career. Little did he know that the most challenging period of his life lay just before him. Being a dedicated union man and tireless in his efforts to improve the lot of every working man and woman, he was 6 times elected president of the Screen Actors Guild of the AFL-CIO. As president of the union, Ron Reagan helped bring equity in salaries and working conditions for actors, technicians, extras, cameramen, almost everyone in the industry. More importantly, he single-handedly took on the job of keeping union members in control of the union and prevented a takeover of the film industry by organized crime. This crusade to preserve the freedom of America's working men and women kindled in Mr. Reagan a deep, abiding interest in the processes of our unique Republican form of government. He began to take an active interest in politics, both in California and on the national scene. He had been raised in a Democrat family by a fiercely independent father who was adamant in his love for freedom. In 1952 and 1956, following his own conscience and with a clear view of the dangers facing America, Ron Reagan volunteered as a Democrat for Eisenhower. In 1962, he officially joined the Republican Party. The rest is history. In 1966, answering the call of his party, he was elected governor of California. Next to president, the biggest job in the nation. More people live in California than any other state. It's the #1 producer of everything from farm goods to computer chips, generating 1 out of every $8 of production in this country. If California was a country, it would rank 8th in the world, nearly equaling the total GNP of the United Kingdom. What the new governor inherited was a state of crisis. California was faced with a $194 million deficit and was spending $1 million a day more than it was taking in. The state was on the brink of bankruptcy. Working with teams from all sectors, the unions, banking, agriculture, education, and industry, Governor Reagan got things back on track. His common sense style and strong creative leadership won him a second term in 1970. And he won by one of the biggest landslides in the history of the state. Governor Reagan became the greatest tax reformer in the state's history. His program included property tax relief of over $2 billion. He reduced sales taxes by over $300 million and gave tax rebates of almost $750 million. The San Francisco Chronicle said, "We exaggerate very little when we say that Governor Reagan has saved the state from bankruptcy." When Governor Reagan left office, the $194 million deficit had been transformed into a $554 million surplus. And while saving the taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, he improved the quality of life for the people of California. Scholarships for needy students were increased by 500%, student loans by over 900%. His environmental protection program was the nation's toughest. He increased unemployment insurance by almost 60%. The head of the AFL-CIO said this about Governor Reagan. Governor Reagan has signed AFL-CIO-backed bills for injured and unemployed workers for more than $266 million. No governor, Republican or Democrat, has ever done anything like that. The efficiency and remarkable effectiveness of the government of California under the leadership of Governor Reagan became a model for every state in the Union. This is a man whose time has come, a man whose principles have been familiar to Americans for 30 years, a man whose accomplishments make him the natural choice for President of the United States. A man who believes that the decline of America must be halted and can be halted. A man who rejects the concept of lowered expectations because he believes in the boundless opportunities of the American idea. A man who has prepared himself for strong, creative leadership. Through all the years, the outstanding characteristic of Ronald Reagan has been confidence. Confidence in the triumph of the principles he has consistently defended throughout his personal and political life. This is the man who believes our nation can regain the stature it has lost in the eyes of the world. This is the man who understands the principles that make America great. Above all, he believes in America and the kind of strong, creative leadership that can restore our faith in the future. He calls not for retreat into the past, but for a confident advance into the future. The day Ronald Reagan takes office as President of the United States will be the day when America comes together for a new beginning. Together, a new beginning.
Well, the house lights will be going up. There they go. Now the delegates are going to express their appreciation for this movie. As promised, and as I suggested to you a few moments ago, the themes were set. Here's Ronald Reagan, folksy, appeal to the audiences, the unions, anti-crime. And here is former President Ford arriving in the hall. You see that. That's happening even as we speak.
Ronald Reagan has just arrived in the convention hall. He stepped to the podium, and the demonstration to greet him is well underway. He's actually a little ahead of schedule, but he shows some indication of wanting to start his speech right away as his wife Nancy applauds him.
A picture of Republican unity up there. They're starting to disperse now, but a number of former presidential candidates, among them Howard Baker,
Bob Dole.
Bob Dole.
And President Ford is directly below our booth. He's an observer. There's Howard Baker and Nancy Reagan exchanging a kiss. Heinz. Guy Vanderjack, who had his moment in the sun here. There's the Notre Dame fight song. There's Jerry Ford. Well, the Gipper has got the nomination.
You know who's looking exceedingly happy today? Betty Ford.
Yes. I'm sure she's relieved.
Although I suspect her happiness doesn't begin to approach that of the man you're seeing right now.
Sorry that they didn't show scenes from some of his films.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the Gipper make another run for it.
Well, they did. They hit all the themes that I expect we're going to be hearing during this campaign. In fact, some of the themes that you just saw on film, I'm sure you'll hear reiterated in Governor Reagan's speech. The business about working for what you get. A man who is of the workers, a former union man himself. And a man who's been able to run California, which, as was pointed out, if it were a country, would rank 8th in the world.
Not only that, you know, Ted, not only was he a union president, but it is true, as he really admits, that he knew hardship and adversity in his life. One of the most poignant stories I've ever heard is the story of the Christmas Eve back in Illinois. Well, here he goes now.
We're using up prime time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're singing our song. Thank you very much. Thank you. You're singing our song. Well, the first thrill tonight was to find myself for the first time in a long time in a movie on prime time. But this, as you can imagine, is the second big thrill. Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Vice President-to-be, this convention, my fellow citizens of this great nation, with a deep awareness of the responsibility conferred by your trust, I accept your nomination for the presidency of the United States. I do so with deep gratitude, and I think also I might interject on behalf of all of us Our thanks to Detroit and the people of Michigan and of this city for the warm hospitality that we have enjoyed. And I thank you for your wholehearted response to my recommendation with regard to George Bush as the candidate for vice president. I'm very proud of our party tonight. This convention has shown to all America a party united with positive programs for solving the nation's problems. A party ready to build a new consensus with all those across the land who share a community of values embodied in these words: family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. Now, I know that we've had a quarrel or two, but as only as to the method of attaining a goal. There was no argument here about the goal. As president, I will establish a liaison with the 50 governors to encourage them to eliminate, wherever it exists, discrimination against women. I will monitor federal laws to ensure their implementation and to add statutes if they are needed. More than anything else, I want my candidacy to unify our country, to renew the American spirit and sense of purpose. I want to carry our message to every American, regardless of party affiliation, who is a member of this community of shared values. Never before in our history have Americans been called upon to face three grave threats to our very existence, any one of which could destroy us. We face a disintegrating economy, a weakened defense, and an energy policy based on the sharing of scarcity. The major issue of this campaign is the direct political, personal, and moral responsibility of Democratic Party leadership in the White House and in the Congress for this unprecedented calamity which has befallen us. They tell us they've done the most that could humanly be done. They say that the United States has had its day in the sun, that our nation has passed its zenith. They expect you to tell your children that the American people no longer have the will to cope with their problems, that the future will be one of sacrifice and few opportunities. My fellow citizens, I utterly reject that view. The American people, the most generous on earth, who created the highest standard of living, are not going to accept the notion that we can only make a better world for others by moving backward ourselves. And those who believe we can have no business leading this nation. I will not stand by and watch this great country destroy itself under mediocre leadership that drifts from one crisis to the next, eroding our national will and purpose. We have come together here because the American people deserve better from those to whom they entrust our nation's highest offices. And we stand united. We stand united in our resolve to do something about it. We need a rebirth of the American tradition of leadership at every level of government and in private life as well. The United States of America is unique in world history because it has a genius for leaders, many leaders on many levels. But back in 1976, Mr. Carter said, "Trust me." And a lot of people did. And now many of those people are out of work. Many have seen their savings eaten away by inflation. Many others on fixed incomes, especially the elderly, have watched helplessly as the cruel tax of inflation wasted away their purchasing power. And today, a great many who trusted Mr. Carter wonder if we can survive the Carter policies of national defense. Trust Me government asks that we concentrate our hopes and dreams on one man, that we trust him to do what's best for us. Well, my view of government places trust not in one person or one party, but in those values that transcend persons and parties. The trust is where it belongs, in the people. The responsibility to live up to that trust is where it belongs, in their elected leaders. That kind of relationship between the people and their elected leaders is a special kind of compact. 360 years ago in 1620, a group of families dared to cross a mighty ocean to build a future for themselves in a new world. When they arrived at Plymouth, Massachusetts, they formed what they called a compact, an agreement among themselves to build a community and abide by its laws. This single act, the voluntary binding together of free people to live under the law, set the pattern for what was to come. A century and a half later, the descendants of those people pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to found this nation. Some forfeited their fortunes and their lives. None sacrificed honor. Fourscore and 7 years later, Abraham Lincoln called upon the people of all America to renew their dedication and their commitment to a government of, for, and by the people. Isn't it once again time to renew our compact of freedom? To pledge to each other all that is best in our lives, all that gives meaning to them for the sake of this our beloved and blessed land. Together, let us make this a new beginning. Let us make a commitment to care for the needy, to teach our children the virtues handed down to us by our families, to have the courage to defend those values and virtues and the willingness to sacrifice for them. Let us pledge to restore in our time the American spirit of voluntary service, of cooperation, of private and community initiative, a spirit that flows like a deep and mighty river through the history of our nation. As your nominee, I pledge to you to restore to the federal government the capacity to do the people's work without dominating their lives. I pledge to you a government that will not only work well, but wisely. Its ability to act tempered by prudence, and its willingness to do good, balanced by the knowledge that government is never more dangerous than when our desire to have it help us blinds us to its great power to harm us. You know, the first Republican president once said, while the people retain their virtue and their vigilance, no administration by any extreme of wickedness or folly can seriously injure the government in the short space of 4 years. If Mr. Lincoln could see what's happened in the last 3.5 years, he might hedge a little on that statement. But with the virtues that are our legacy as a free people, and with the vigilance that sustains liberty, we still have time to use our renewed compact to overcome the injuries that have been done to America these past 3.5 years. First, We must overcome something the present administration has cooked up, a new and altogether indigestible economic stew. One part inflation, one part high unemployment, one part recession, one part runaway taxes, one part deficit spending, seasoned with an energy crisis. It's an economic stew that has turned the national stomach. Ours are not problems of abstract economic theory. These are problems of flesh and blood, problems that cause pain and destroy the moral fiber of real people who should not suffer the further indignity of being told by the government that it is all somehow their fault. We do not have inflation because, as Mr. Carter says, we've lived too well. The head of a government which has utterly refused to live within its means and which has in the last few days told us that this coming year's deficit will be $60 billion, dares to point the finger of blame at business and labor, both of which have been engaged in a losing struggle, just trying to stay even. High taxes, we are told, are somehow good for us, as if when government spends our money it isn't inflationary, but when we spend it, it is. Those who preside over the worst energy shortage in our history tell us to use less so that we'll run out of oil, gasoline, and natural gas a little more slowly. Well, now, conservation is desirable, of course, but we mustn't waste energy. But conservation is not the sole answer to our energy needs. America must get to work producing more energy. The Republican program for solving economic problems is based on growth and productivity. Large amounts of oil and natural gas lay beneath our land and off our shores untouched because the present administration seems to believe the American people would rather see more regulation, more taxes, and more controls than more energy. Coal offers a great potential. So does nuclear energy produced under rigorous safety standards. It could supply electricity for thousands of industry and millions of jobs and homes. It must not be thwarted by a tiny minority opposed to economic growth, which often finds friendly ears in regulatory agencies for its obstructionist campaigns. Now, make no mistake, we will not permit the safety of our people or our environmental heritage to be jeopardized. But we are going to reaffirm that the economic prosperity of our people is a fundamental part of our environment. Our problems are both acute and chronic. Yet all we hear from those in positions of leadership are the same tired proposals for more government tinkering, more meddling, and more control, all of which led us to this sorry state in the first place. Can anyone look at the record of this administration and say, well done? Can anyone compare the state of our economy when the Carter administration took office with where we are today and say, keep up the good work? Can anyone look at our reduced standing in the world today and say, let's have 4 more years of this? I believe the American people are going to answer these questions as you've answered them in the first week in November, and their answer will be, no, we've had enough. And then it will be up to us beginning next January 20th, to offer an administration and congressional leadership of competence and more than a little courage. We must have the clarity of vision to see the difference between what is essential and what is merely desirable, and then the courage to bring our government back under control. It is essential. It is essential that we maintain both the forward momentum of economic growth and the strength of the safety net between those in our society who need help. We also believe it is essential that the integrity of all aspects of Social Security be preserved. Beyond these essentials, I believe it is clear our federal government is overgrown and overweight. Indeed, it is time our government should go on a diet. Therefore, my first act as chief executive will be to impose an immediate and thorough freeze on federal hiring. Then we're going to enlist the very best minds from business, labor, and whatever quarter to conduct a detailed review of every department, bureau, and agency that lives by federal appropriation. And we're going to enlist the help and ideas of many dedicated and hard-working government employees at all levels who want a more efficient government just as much as the rest of us do. I know that many of them are demoralized by the confusion and waste they confront in their work as a result of failed and failing policies. Our instructions to the groups we enlist will be simple and direct. We will remind them that government programs exist at the sufferance of the American taxpayer and are paid for with money earned by working men and women, and programs that represent a waste of their money, a theft from their pocketbooks, must have that waste eliminated or that program must go. It must go by executive order where possible, by congressional action where necessary. Everything that can be run more effectively by state and local government, we shall turn over to state and local government along with the funding sources to pay for it. We're going to put an end to the money merry-go-round where our money becomes Washington's money to be spent by states and cities exactly the way the federal bureaucrats tell us it has to be spent. I will not accept the excuse that the federal government has grown so big and powerful that it is beyond the control of any president, any administration, or Congress. We are going to put an end to the notion that the American taxpayer exists to fund the federal government. The federal government exists to serve the American people. On January 20th, we are going to reestablish that truth. Also on that date, we are going to initiate actions to get substantial relief for our tax-paying citizens and action to put people back to work. None of this will be based on any new form of monetary tinkering or fiscal sleight of hand. We will simply apply to government the common sense that we all use in our daily lives. Work and family are at the center of our lives, the foundation of our dignity as a free people. When we deprive people of what they've earned or take away their jobs, we destroy their dignity and undermine their families. We can't support families unless there are jobs, and we can't have jobs unless the people have both money to invest and the faith to invest it. These are concepts that stem from an economic system that for more than 200 years has helped us master a continent, create a previously undreamed of prosperity for our people, and has fed millions of others around the globe. And that system will continue to serve us in the future if our government will stop ignoring the basic values on which it was built and stop betraying the trust and goodwill of the American workers who keep it going. The American people are carrying the heaviest peacetime tax burden in our nation's history, and it will grow even heavier under present law next January. We're taxing ourselves into economic exhaustion and stagnation, crushing our ability and incentive to save, invest, and produce. This must stop. We must halt this fiscal self-destruction and restore sanity to our economic system. I've long advocated a 30% reduction in income tax rates over a period of 3 years. This phased tax reduction would begin with a 10% down payment tax cut in 1981, which the Republicans in Congress and I have already proposed. A phased reduction of tax rates would go a long way toward easing the heavy burden on the American people, but we shouldn't stop there. Within the context of economic conditions and appropriate budget priorities, during each fiscal year of my presidency, I would strive to go further. This would include improvement in business depreciation taxes so we can stimulate investment in order to get plants and equipment replaced. Put more Americans back to work and put our nation back on the road to being competitive in world commerce. We will also work to reduce the cost of government as a percentage of our gross national product. The first task of national leadership is to set realistic and honest priorities in our policies and our budget. And I pledge that my administration will do that. When I talk of tax cuts, I'm reminded that every major tax cut in this century has strengthened the economy, generated renewed productivity, and ended up yielding new revenues for the government by creating new investment, new jobs, and more commerce among our people. The present administration has been forced by us Republicans to play follow the leader with regard to a tax cut. But in this election year, we must take with the proverbial grain of salt any tax cut proposed by those who have already given us the greatest single tax increase in our nation's history. When those in leadership give us tax increases and tell us we must also do with less, have they thought about those who've always had less, especially the minorities? This is like telling them that just as they step on that first rung of the ladder of opportunity, the ladder is being pulled out from under them. That may be the Democratic leadership's message to the minorities, but it won't be our message. Ours will be, we have to move ahead, but we're not going to leave anyone behind. Thanks to the economic policies of the Democratic Party, millions of Americans find themselves out of work. Millions more have never even had a fair chance to learn new skills, hold a decent job, or secure for themselves and their families a share in the prosperity of this nation. It's time to put America back to work, to make our cities and towns resound with the confident voices of men and women of all races, nationalities, and faiths, bringing home to their families a paycheck they can cash for honest money. For those without skills, we'll find a way to help them get new skills. For those without job opportunities, we'll stimulate new opportunities, particularly in the inner cities where they live. For those who've abandoned hope, we'll restore hope and we'll welcome them into a great national crusade to make America great again. When we move from domestic affairs and cast our eyes abroad, we see an equally sorry chapter in the record of the present administration. A Soviet combat brigade trains in Cuba just 90 miles from our shores. A Soviet army of invasion occupies Afghanistan, further threatening our vital interests in the Middle East. America's defense strength is at its lowest ebb in a generation, while the Soviet Union is vastly outspending us in both strategic and conventional arms. Our European allies, looking nervously at the growing menace from the East, turn to us for leadership and fail to find it. And incredibly, more than 50, as you've been told from this platform so eloquently already, more than 50 of our fellow Americans have been held captive for over 8 years, 8 months, by a dictatorial foreign power that holds us up to ridicule before the world. Adversaries large and small test our will and seek to confound our resolve. But we are given weakness when we need strength, vacillation when the times demand firmness. The Carter administration lives in a world of make-believe, every day drawing up a response to that day's troubles, regardless of what happened yesterday and what will happen tomorrow. But you and I live in a real world where disasters are overtaking our nation without any real response from Washington. This is make-believe, self-deceit, and above all, transparent hypocrisy. For example, Mr. Carter says he supports the volunteer army, but he lets military pay and benefits slip so low that many of our enlisted personnel are actually eligible for food stamps. Re-enlistment rates drop. And just recently, after he fought all week against a proposed pay increase for our men and women in the military, he then helicoptered out to the carrier, the USS Nimitz, which was returning from long months of duty in the Indian Ocean, and told the crew of that ship that he advocated better pay for them and their comrades. Where does he really stand now that he's back on shore? Well, I'll tell you where I stand. I do not favor a peacetime draft or registration, but I do favor pay and benefit levels that will attract and keep highly motivated men and women in our volunteer forces. And back them up with an active reserve, trained and ready for instant call in case of emergency. You know, there may be a sailor at the helm of the ship of state, but the ship has no rudder. Critical decisions are made at times almost in comic fashion, but who can laugh? Who was not embarrassed when the administration handed a major propaganda victory in the United Nations to the enemies of Israel, our staunch Middle East ally for 3 decades, and then claimed that the American vote was a mistake, the result of a failure of communication between the President, his Secretary of State, and his UN ambassador? Who does not feel a growing sense of unease as our allies, facing repeated instances of an amateurish and confused administration, reluctantly conclude that America is unwilling or unable to fulfill its obligations as leader of the free world? Who does not feel rising alarm when the question in any discussion of foreign policy is no longer should we do something, but do we have the capacity to do anything? The administration which has brought us to this state is seeking your endorsement for 4 more years of weakness, indecision, mediocrity, and incompetence. No American should vote until he or she has asked, is the United States stronger and more respected now than it was 3.5 years ago? Is the world safer, a safer place in which to live? It is the responsibility of the President of the United States in working for peace to ensure that the safety of our people cannot successfully be threatened by a hostile foreign power. As President, fulfilling that responsibility will be my #1 priority. We're not a warlike people, quite the opposite. We always seek to live in peace. We resort to force infrequently and with great reluctance, and only after we've determined that it's absolutely necessary. We are awed, and rightly so, by the forces of destruction at loose in the world in this nuclear era. But neither can we be naive or foolish. 4 times in my lifetime, America has gone to war, bleeding the lives of its young men into the sands of island beachheads, the fields of Europe, and the jungles and rice paddies of Asia. We know only too well that war comes not when the forces of freedom are strong. It is when they are weak that tyrants are tempted. We simply cannot learn these lessons the hard way again without risking our destruction. Of all the objectives we seek, first and foremost is the establishment of lasting world peace. We must always stand ready to negotiate in good faith, ready to pursue any reasonable avenue that holds forth the promise of lessening tensions and furthering the prospects of peace. But let our friends and those who may wish us ill take note. The United States has an obligation to its citizens and to the people of the world never to let those who would destroy freedom dictate the future course of life on this planet. I would regard my election as proof that we have renewed our resolve to preserve world peace and freedom, that this nation will once again be strong enough to do that. Now this evening marks the last step, save one, of a campaign that has taken Nancy and me from one end of this great nation to the other over many months and thousands of miles. There are those who question the way we choose a president, who say that our process imposes difficult and exhausting burdens on those who seek the office. I have not found it so. It's impossible to capture in words the splendor of this vast continent which God has granted as our portion of his creation. There are no words to express the extraordinary strength and character of this breed of people we call American. Everywhere we've met thousands of Democrats, independents, and Republicans from all economic conditions, all walks of life, bound together in that community of shared values of family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. They're concerned, yes. They're not frightened. They're disturbed, but not dismayed. They are the kind of men and women Tom Paine had in mind when he wrote during the darkest days of the American Revolution, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again." Nearly 150 years after Tom Paine wrote those words, an American president told the generation of the Great Depression that it had a rendezvous with destiny. I believe this generation of Americans today also has a rendezvous with destiny. Tonight, let us dedicate ourselves to renewing the American compact. I ask you not simply to trust me, but to trust your values, our values, and to hold me responsible for living up to them. I ask you to trust that American spirit, which knows no ethnic, religious, social, political, regional, or economic boundaries. The spirit that burned with zeal in the hearts of millions of immigrants from every corner of the earth who came here in search of freedom. Some say that spirit no longer exists, but I've seen it. I've felt it all across this land, in the big cities, the small towns, and in rural America. It's still there, ready to blaze into life if you and I are willing to do what has to be done. We have to do the practical things, the down-to-earth things such as creating policies that will stimulate our economy, increase productivity, and put America back to work. The time is now to limit federal spending, to insist on a stable monetary reform, and to free ourselves from imported oil. The time is now to resolve that the basis of a firm and principled foreign policy is one that takes the world as it is and seeks to change it by leadership and example, not by harangue, harassment, or wishful thinking. The time now is now. The time is now to say that we shall seek new friendships and expand others and improve others, but we shall not do so by breaking our word or casting aside old friends and allies. And the time is now to redeem promises once made to the American people by another candidate in another time and another place. He said, "For 3 long years, I have been going up and down this country preaching that government, federal, state, and local, costs too much. I shall not stop that preaching. As an immediate program of action, we must abolish useless offices. We must eliminate unnecessary functions of government. We must consolidate subdivisions of government and, like the private citizen, give up luxuries which we can no longer afford. And then he said, I propose to you, my friends, and through you, that government of all kinds, big and little, be made solvent, and that the example be set by the President of the United States and his cabinet. End of quote. That was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's words as he accepted the Democratic nomination for president in 1932. The time is now, my fellow Americans, to recapture our destiny, to take it into our own hands. And to do this, will take many of us working together. I ask you tonight, all over this land, to volunteer your help in this cause so that we can carry our message throughout the land. Isn't it time that we, the people, carry out those unkept promises that we pledged to each other and to all America on this July day, 48 years later, that now we intend to do just that? I have thought of something that's not a part of my speech and worried over whether I should do it. Can we doubt that only a divine providence placed this land, this island of freedom, here as a refuge for all those people in the world who yearn to breathe free? Jews and Christians enduring persecution behind the Iron Curtain, the boat people of Southeast Asia, of Cuba, and of Haiti, the victims of drought and famine in Africa, the freedom fighters in Afghanistan, and our own countrymen held in savage captivity. I'll confess that I've been a little afraid to suggest what I'm going to suggest. I'm more afraid not to. Can we begin our crusade, join together in a moment of silent prayer? God bless America. Thank you.
Ronald Reagan has concluded now the speech that he obviously regards as one of the most important to be given during this campaign. Reagan campaign officials have believed that this speech would be the centerpiece. Here come the balloons down now. The centerpiece of the beginning of his campaign. He would be speaking not, of course, to the audience here, but solely to the audience in the convention hall, but beyond this place to all the people of the country. We've had experience before with nationwide addresses given by Ronald Reagan, and they've had usually a tremendous impact.
Well, the demonstration is still continuing, Frank. It began, obviously, when Governor Reagan concluded his address. And I must point out, you began to touch on this a moment ago. It might have been perceived from the vantage point of the people on the floor here as rather a flat delivery. This was not a stem winder kind of speech. He wasn't whipping up the audience.
Oh, here comes Mr. Ford.
Ah, here he is.
But I think Governor Reagan's point here was that he was speaking to a far larger audience on television. And as much as anything, he wants to avoid some of the charges that have already been made against him by those who oppose him, that he is a dangerous man to have in the presidency. He came across as Mr. Reasonableness himself tonight, and the speech was delivered in a style far more congenial to television than to a large gathering like this.
He also wanted to demonstrate a sense of compassion, that he is not impervious to the plight of the poor and the oppressed and those who have not fully shared in the American dream as yet. The demonstration has been underway for more than 11 minutes here now in the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, a demonstration in celebration of Ronald Reagan's acceptance, to no one's surprise, of the Republican nomination for President of the United States. As you see, he has been joined on the platform by President and Mrs. Ford. Frank, I think we just have to make a brief mention of that one ad-lib moment at the end of the speech when Governor Reagan, apparently in great distress as to whether he should do it or not, because I don't think he wants to be accused of hypocrisy or of using religion in any way, but in what was probably the most moving moment of his speech, decided that he would, in effect, invoke the name of the Almighty, or at least his blessing, and called for a moment of silent prayer, and I think that moved people here, perhaps even more than the speech itself. For Ronald Reagan, after his acceptance speech, has now come to an end, and we're having the invocation down there, which will actually formally bring this convention to a close, ending a little bit ahead of schedule, but nevertheless, the nominee was able to give his television address in prime time, and I'm sure that that's what they wanted. I was intrigued, Ted, by the fact that he chose to quote a Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, and he found words of Franklin Roosevelt's to quote also.
Acceptance by these people out here is an experience that I'll remember always.
You used the word crusade.
Yes.
And I guess that's what you meant.
Yes, I do. Yes.
What made you decide to offer that moment of silent prayer?
Well, as I said, I was more afraid not to.
I assume that you and President Ford are no longer in disagreement on where he ought to be in the campaign.
No, he made that decision, and he believes, and he has sworn to me and pledged his all-out support in the campaign, and believes that he could be more effective this way than he could on the ticket.
And you expect that he'll campaign?
Rough campaign on you?
What?
You expect the Democrats to make this a rough campaign, Governor?
I think there are indications of that, yes.
What are you going to do about it?
What? Well, I'm just going to keep on doing what I've been doing, criticizing what I think are the wrong policies and advocating other ones, and see what happens.
I guess for a sports announcer, it's a long way to being presidential candidate, isn't it?
It sure beats any homecoming game I ever broadcast.
Thank you very much,
Great job.
Gentlemen.
Thank you, Jim. Governor Reagan being interviewed by the correspondents there on the platform.
I think the most important thing that Ronald Reagan takes from this convention is a Republican Party that is more or less at peace with itself after 40 years. And it's ironic that the divisiveness which began in the party with the nomination of a former Democrat, Wendell Willkie, in 1940, now seems to be at an end with the nomination of another former Democrat, Ronald Reagan. The party now is an inclusive party to the degree that I have not seen in covering these conventions for the last 20 years. I think that that is the big thing that has happened here, and I think that it will take out into the country the kind of party that hasn't offered this kind of an appeal since perhaps the days of Eisenhower. And it offers it without that streak of divisiveness that so plagued this party for the last 40 years.